The black maid had stolen the millionaire's Lamborghini to save his son. What she did next left everyone stunned. Grace Williams tightened her trembling hands as she bent down to adjust the straps on little Ethan's sandals. The 5-year-old, the only son of her employer, billionaire Nicholas Harrington, usually babbled away non-stop, his large blue eyes full of mischief and boundless energy. But now he sat motionless in his seat, his gaze vacant, and his eyelids drooping with exhaustion. A knot of dread formed in Grace's chest. "Ethan, are you okay?" she asked softly, pressing her warm palm to his cheek. His skin was burning hot, and the heat pressed back against her palm, making her heart pound all the harder. There was no answer. Ethan blinked weakly, then swayed as if someone had cut the strings of a puppet. Before Grace could react, he slumped forward, completely unconscious. "Ethan!" Grace screamed, her heart pounding in her throat. She lunged forward and caught his limp body before he could hit the cold marble floor. His face was ashen, and his lips had turned a terrifying shade of pale blue. Grace pressed her ear to his chest and found his breathing so faint it felt as if it might stop at any moment. "No, no, no," she whispered in panic, her eyes darting wildly for help. "Can anyone please help?" Her cries echoed through the vast halls of the Harrington estate, but there was only empty silence in response. The billionaire's mansion always felt enormous, but today it felt like a lonely labyrinth. The cook was at the guest house, the head butler had stepped out on an errand, and the intercom system hadn't worked for almost a week despite multiple repair requests. Grace's hands shook as she fumbled for her phone and dialed the mansion's private emergency line 3 times, but each call went straight to voicemail. Desperate, she dialed 911. "An ambulance will be there in about 12 to 15 minutes, the dispatcher said, her tone professional yet devoid of empathy. 15 minutes? Ethan didn't have 15 minutes. His life was slipping away in her arms. Grace's gaze flicked to the great window overlooking the front courtyard, where a gleaming yellow Lamborghini sat in the sunlight. It was Nicholas Harrington's prized possession, his constant obsession. He had made it perfectly clear that Grace was never to touch it. He even forbade her from coming within 10 feet of it. But Ethan was seconds from death. Grace's heart pounded like war drums in her ears, urging her to act. A reckless thought flared through her mind. Could she really do it? If she failed, she would lose everything, her job, her reputation, maybe her freedom. But if she did nothing, Ethan would die. "God forgive me," Grace whispered, steeling herself. Cradling Ethan's limp body, she raced from the dining room down the polished marble corridor. The heavy front doors swung open at her approach, a cool morning breeze snapping her hair back as she burst onto the gravel driveway. Gently, she laid Ethan across the passenger seat of the Lamborghini. Her gloved hands trembled as she buckled him in, securing the harness around his small frame. Then she slipped into the driver's seat, black work shoes skidding briefly on the gravel before she steadied herself. Her pulse raced as she turned the key. The engine roared to life like an awakened beast. Grace floored the gas pedal without a second thought. The tires screeched against the white gravel, kicking up clouds of dust as the automatic gates slid open in reluctant protest. She ignored the security cameras, ignored the consequences awaiting her. All that mattered was keeping Ethan alive. The bright yellow Lamborghini shot out of the estate and into the main road, leaving a trail of dust in its wake. Dust that marked the boundary she had just crossed between life and death. In that fateful moment, Grace knew she had made the right choice. She would risk everything, her livelihood, her dignity, even her safety, to save the boy she loved as if he were her own son. And so began the desperate journey of Grace and Ethan. The polished yellow Lamborghini thundered onto the main road, leaving behind the estate gates that were slowly sliding shut, like cold, unforgiving eyes watching Grace's every move. Her heart pounded so fiercely that each breath felt strangled by fear, yet steeled by determination. She knew the security cameras were recording everything. The image of a struggling black maid daringly behind the wheel of $1 million supercar, a sight utterly at odds with her everyday life. In Grace's mind echoed Nicholas Harrington's icy warning from just a few weeks ago. She had been carefully wiping down the Lamborghini's gleaming glass when he'd approached in his Armani suit, his gaze stern. "Grace, you know I appreciate your work," he had said. "But remember this above all. Under no circumstances are you ever to come near this car without my permission. Do you understand the consequences if you violate that rule?" She still remembered his look, pride in his success, and a barely concealed disdain for someone in her position. It stung like a reminder of her place, an invisible servant, always kept at a safe distance from anything precious or luxurious. But now, with Ethan fighting for his life beside her, all those warnings meant nothing. Grace felt as if 1,000 knives were piercing her heart. All that mattered was the precious life of the little boy she loved more than her own. Suddenly, Ethan seized violently. His small body trembled, his eyes squeezed shut, and his breathing grew ever more fragile. "No, no, Ethan, come on, sweetheart. I won't let anything happen to you," Grace screamed, tears slipping onto Ethan's ashen face. In that moment, every shred of doubt vanished. She gripped the wheel and stomped on the gas harder. Her survival decision was made. She would save Ethan, whatever the cost. The car surged forward like a golden leopard chasing its prey. Grace nearly held her breath as she sped past the row of surveillance cameras lining the estate entrance, those ever-watchful eyes that once symbolized Nicholas's power, now bearing witness to her desperate act. If anything, they only fueled her resolve. The engine's roar was like a wild beast's growl, startling Grace. She'd never driven anything so powerful or expensive. Her gloved hands, still encased in yellow rubber, shook on the wheel. Her heart threatened to burst in her chest when she felt the tires slip on the gravel shoulder, but she fought to steady her grip and maintain control. She glanced at Ethan again. His face was a ghastly pale blue, his tiny lips now a frightening purple, and his breathing barely perceptible. Grace's chest burned with guilt. If only she'd noticed sooner, if only she'd acted at the first sign of trouble. But there was no time for regret. She had to focus on saving him with every ounce of strength and courage she could muster. In her rearview mirror, she saw the electronic gates clicking shut behind her. The Harrington estate receded, and with it the world she had known, now replaced by the looming consequences of her choice. Yet, in that moment, those consequences meant nothing. Ethan's life was all that mattered, and if that made her a criminal, so be it. The morning sun cast a golden glow on the road ahead, a fragile promise of hope. Grace pressed the accelerator further. The Lamborghini leapt forward as if it understood its mission. She whispered a prayer under her breath. "God, please help me. Please save this innocent child." Behind her, the security cameras continued to capture crystal-clear footage of the priceless yellow car speeding out of the estate. Panic erupted in the security room as guards frantically called Nicholas Harrington to report the unthinkable theft. Grace had no idea. All she saw was the open road before her, and behind her, the life she'd known had been irrevocably shattered. Beside her, Ethan lay silently, his fragile life a thread slipping through her fingers. The yellow Lamborghini raced on, leaving a swirl of dusty haze in its wake, just as uncertain as Grace's own future. But no matter what lay ahead, her decision to save Ethan could never be undone. The gleaming yellow Lamborghini streaked down the highway, leaving a haze of dust and the thunderous roar of its engine in its wake. Grace's heart felt as if it would burst from her chest. Each beat hammered in her ears, drowning out every other sound. She gripped the steering wheel so tightly her knuckles turned white, her wide eyes fixed with intense focus on the road ahead. This was no time to hesitate. Every second, every inch of road was a battle to buy Ethan more time. Grace couldn't afford even a moment's delay. She stomped on the accelerator, and the car shot forward like an arrow unleashed from a bow, weaving past slower vehicles at breakneck speed. Up ahead, the traffic light flipped from yellow to red. A voice inside her screamed to stop, but Ethan's fragile life left no room for caution. Taking a deep breath, she floored it, smashing through the intersection amid blaring horns and screeching brakes from the cars around her. A huge 18-wheeler thundered past, its driver furiously blasting his horn, face flushed with rage. Grace bowed her head over the wheel and whispered a quick, "I'm sorry," then raced on. "Sorry. I'm so sorry. Please forgive me," she muttered, eyes never leaving the scorching asphalt ahead. She forced herself not to glance in the rearview mirror, where angry, shocked faces tracked her every move. Instead, she concentrated on taming the beast beneath her hands, a wildly powerful Lamborghini that threatened to spin out with every sharp turn. Her hands shook as each twitch of the wheel risked sending them careening off course. Ahead, 2 delivery trucks cruised side by side, blocking nearly the entire lane. Gritting her teeth, Grace pressed her foot harder against the pedal. The Lamborghini growled like a pouncing predator as she jerked the wheel, slipping through an impossibly narrow gap between the trucks. The car's side skirt grazed one trailer with a metallic scrape that made her flinch, but there was no time to worry about scratches on a $1 million car. "Come on, Ethan, stay with me. Just a little farther," she whispered desperately, glancing over at the little boy. He lay strapped in the passenger seat, his breath so faint it was nearly imperceptible, his tiny face a ghastly pale. She prayed again, voice trembling, "God, I beg you, don't take this innocent child. Give me just a bit more time." But the only response was terrifying silence from Ethan. Suddenly, his body convulsed violently. His small hands jerked as if shocked, his head snapping back, his frame arching in pain. "No! Ethan, no!" Grace screamed, tears streaming down her face. Agony cut through her like a blade. One hand shot out to steady his shaking form, while the other clutched the wheel, desperate not to lose control. "Be strong, Ethan. Can you hear me? Don't give up!" she yelled, her voice ragged. The car lurched wildly through the crowded traffic, nearly clipping the concrete divider. Grace fought to right it, bracing her arms as she refused to let this car wreak ruin their one chance at saving him. In the distance, the hospital's emergency entrance came into view, a faint beacon shimmering in the heat rising from the asphalt. But the road there felt endless. Every foot of pavement stretched before her, time mocking her urgency. She checked Ethan again. His breathing had nearly stopped. Terror washed through her to her very bones. She had never been so powerless. "Please, Ethan, hold on for me. For your father. You've got your whole life ahead of you," she whispered, her voice breaking. She gripped the wheel until it bruised her palms and blasted forward, the Lamborghini a yellow blur against the city streets. Horns blared and pedestrians shouted as she tore past them. None of it mattered. She had one mission: save Ethan no matter what. In what felt like an eternity, the hospital's lights grew clearer. Grace's eyes filled with a fragile hope and paralyzing fear at once. Only a few hundred meters remained. But each second felt like a lifetime in this race between life and death. She knew a single mistake now could doom everything. The car hurtled toward the ER doors, and in that instant, Grace sensed the Grim Reaper waiting just beyond, ready to steal Ethan away from her forever. "You will not take him," she whispered fiercely, planting her foot down to the floor. The Lamborghini surged straight ahead, and Grace braced herself to face whatever consequences awaited, determined to protect that precious life with every ounce of strength she had. The sleek yellow Lamborghini tore down the highway as Nicholas Harrington's opulent estate simmered in tense uncertainty. In the security control room, giant screens replayed the prized car's daring escape through the main gates, leaving behind a swirl of dust and long tire tracks across the gravel. Jack Donovan, the burly head of security with hawk-sharp eyes, stared at the monitors in disbelief. He rubbed his eyes, hoping it was a trick of the light. But there it was in clear detail. The boss's beloved Lamborghini had been stolen by his own maid, Grace Williams. "No way," Jack muttered, shaking his head. He'd always thought well of Grace. Polite, gentle, diligent, never a hint of trouble. Seeing her behind the wheel of that exotic supercar felt like a betrayal of everything he believed about her. "Mr. Donovan, we have to call Mr. Harrington right away," stammered Tom, a young security officer whose voice shook with nerves. Jack took a steadying breath and dialed Nicholas's private line. Meanwhile, atop Harrington Tower, in a lavish boardroom framed by floor-to-ceiling windows, Nicholas Harrington was leading a critical board meeting. Well-dressed executives sat around a polished walnut table, hanging on his every word as he outlined the company's growth strategy with commanding confidence. Suddenly, Nicholas's personal phone buzzed. He glanced at the caller ID, security control, and a bad feeling made him pause mid-sentence. He signaled for the meeting to pause and stepped into the corridor. "What is it, Jack? I'm in a meeting," Nicholas barked, annoyance creasing his brow. "Sir, your Lamborghini. It's been stolen," Jack said carefully, choosing his words. "What?" Nicholas's voice shot up in shock. "Who would dare take my car?" Jack drew a deep breath and forced out the name he never wanted to speak. "Grace Williams, sir. The cameras show her driving it away." Nicholas froze, a surge of fury and betrayal flushing his face. Grace, the mild-mannered, obedient maid, had dared to betray his trust. It was unthinkable. "Are you sure, Jack?" "How could Grace possibly do this?" Nicholas ground out, his jaw clenched. "I'm sorry, sir, but there's no mistake," Jack replied, exasperated. "I don't understand it either." Nicholas crushed the phone in his hand, his breathing quickening as anger roiled inside him. This wasn't just theft of a luxury asset. It was a stab at the trust and generosity he'd shown Grace. "Call the police immediately. Tell them my yellow Lamborghini has been stolen. I want her arrested on sight. No delays," he ordered, his tone cold and merciless. "Yes, Mr. Harrington," Jack answered, torn but compelled to obey. Nicholas ended the call and stood in the grand hallway for a moment, striving to calm the storm in his mind. A crushing disappointment weighed on him, mingled with bitter betrayal. He returned to the boardroom, but the fury still burned in his eyes. The other board members exchanged uneasy glances, but no one dared ask what had happened. "This meeting is adjourned," Nicholas declared curtly, his voice so icy it sent shivers around the room. The executives hurried out, none daring to linger. Nicholas sank into a chair, one hand pressed to his forehead, trying to banish the chaotic thoughts. Grace, her name echoed mockingly in his mind. How could she betray him like this? Had he been too kind, too trusting? He stared out the massive window at the sprawling city below, now feeling like a stranger in his own world. All he felt was rage and deceit. That Lamborghini wasn't just a car, it was a symbol of the power and success he'd built. Grace's brazen theft felt like an open challenge to his authority and status. He balled his fist, a cold glint in his eyes. He vowed there and then never to forgive Grace Williams for this reckless, daring act. She would face the full consequences of betraying his trust. At the city police station, emergency dispatchers received the call, and a massive manhunt was launched at once. Nobody realized that this desperate pursuit was pushing an innocent woman into the most harrowing nightmare of her life. And on the scorching highway, Grace raced against the clock, unaware that a full-scale dragnet was closing in right behind her. Just as the manhunt for Grace was unfolding quietly at the city police station, the gleaming yellow Lamborghini suddenly roared onto the highway and slammed to a screeching halt in front of St. Matthew's emergency entrance. Tires squealed against the asphalt, sending up a thick cloud of white smoke that snapped everyone's attention to the scene. Trembling, Grace yanked open the car door and hurried around to the passenger side, scooping up Ethan, now as fragile and pale as a little angel, his lips a chilling shade of purple. His breathing was all but imperceptible. Tears streamed down Grace's face as she cried out in desperation, "Please, help me save this child. He's dying. Someone, please." Nurses and doctors poured out of the emergency doors at once. A middle-aged nurse leapt forward to take Ethan from Grace's arms, shouting urgent orders as she raced toward the resuscitation bay. The boy was laid on a gurney, wheels clattering as they pushed him through the sliding glass doors that shut behind him with a jarring finality that crushed Grace's last thread of hope. Frozen in place, Grace could only watch through the thick glass as the medical team surrounded Ethan, hurriedly hooking him up to monitors and oxygen. She pressed a shaking hand to her mouth, stifling the sobs that threatened to overwhelm her. She had never felt so helpless or heartbroken. Ethan wasn't her own child, but he had long since become part of her heart, her own flesh and blood in all but name. Before she could catch her breath, a firm, cold voice cut through the chaos behind her. "Hey you, turn around and put your hands on your head." Grace spun around to see a tall, stern-faced police officer glaring at her. Before she could grasp what was happening, he stepped forward and snapped a pair of handcuffs in his hand. "What are you doing? I just brought the boy here. I didn't do anything wrong." Grace stammered, backing away in tears. The officer shook his head without pity, gripping her arm as he replied, "You've been reported for stealing Nicholas Harrington's Lamborghini. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." Grace struggled gently against him, but it was useless. The cold steel cuffs bit into her wrists, an unforgiving reminder that she was trapped in a waking nightmare. "No, please, listen to me. I only wanted to save Ethan. He's Mr. Harrington's son. He's going to die. I had no choice." She sobbed, her face streaked with tears. But the officer was unmoved. He escorted her out through the emergency entrance where a squad car with flashing red and blue lights waited. Grace cast one last anguished glance through the hospital windows, catching sight of Ethan lying motionless on the gurney while doctors fought desperately for his life. "Ethan," she whispered, her heart wrenching as her legs gave out beneath her. Passers-by watched in stunned silence as the handcuffed, impoverished black woman was led away, none of them understanding the true motives behind her desperate act. Grace was ushered into the back seat of the patrol car, pain and fear in her eyes as she watched the emergency doors fade from view. A storm of questions raged in her mind. Would Ethan survive? Would she ever see him again, or end up imprisoned for a crime she committed to save a child? The squad car pulled away slowly, and Grace bowed her head in silent tears, her wrists throbbing from the tight cuffs. Yet nothing hurt more than the fear for Ethan's life. The boy she risked everything to rescue. Inside the hospital, the medical team raced against every precious second to save Ethan. But they had no way of knowing that the very woman they'd just arrested was the one who had gambled her freedom, and perhaps her future, on the slim hope of bringing him back from the brink of death. The sleek black Mercedes slammed to a stop in front of St. Matthew's Hospital. Nicholas Harrington leapt out of the car, his steps urgent, eyes blazing with anger and disappointment. Bystanders, recognizing the city's most powerful man, hurriedly moved aside, their faces a mix of curiosity and fear at the fury radiating from him. Nicholas stormed down the hospital corridor, his imposing presence silencing the hallway. He reached the reception desk and spoke in a cold, commanding voice. "I'm Nicholas Harrington. Where is my son, Ethan Harrington?" The nurse at the desk looked up in alarm, clearly flustered, then quickly stood and directed him to the emergency area. "Mr. Harrington, your son is in trauma room 2. The doctors are doing everything they can." Nicholas's heart sank. His steps slowed as an invisible dread tightened around him. He approached the large glass window overlooking the trauma bay and froze. Inside, Ethan lay motionless on a stretcher, his frail body hooked up to a tangle of tubes and machines. His skin was ashen, eyes shut in weakness, lips tinted a frightening shade of purple. Doctors and nurses moved with tense urgency, fighting against the border between life and death. Nicholas pressed a hand to the cold glass, his breath coming in heavy bursts. His initial rage had drained away, replaced by a despair he'd never known. He'd never imagined facing the terror of possibly losing his only child. In that moment, all his wealth, status, and power meant nothing compared to the sight of his son's fragile life hanging in the balance. "Mr. Harrington?" came a calm, serious voice behind him. Startled, Nicholas turned to see Chief Physician Dr. David Bennett, his face grave. "Yes, that's me. How is my son?" Nicholas asked, struggling to keep his tone controlled, though his eyes begged for reassurance. Dr. Bennett exhaled slowly. "Ethan's condition is critical, Mr. Harrington. He suffered an acute anaphylactic shock, likely a severe allergic reaction. If he had arrived even a few minutes later, we wouldn't have been able to save him." Nicholas felt as if 1,000 needles were piercing his heart. He stood motionless as the doctor's words sank in. "But he did make it in time," Dr. Bennett continued, his gaze steady. "Thanks to the woman who brought him in, she literally saved Ethan's life." Nicholas frowned, a strange intuition rising in him. "That woman? Was it Grace Williams?" Dr. Bennett nodded firmly. "Yes, sir. Grace Williams. The nurses said she was panicked, crying and pleading with us to help him immediately. I believe she was even detained right outside the ER. But honestly, if she hadn't gotten Ethan here when she did, he wouldn't be alive." Nicholas's throat tightened, his face shifting through shock, disbelief, and guilt. He had branded Grace a traitor and a thief only minutes earlier. Yet she was the one who had saved his son's life. "Are you certain, Doctor?" he asked, desperately seeking confirmation to make sense of the chaos in his mind. "I'm certain, Mr. Harrington. Every nurse who witnessed it can attest. Grace did everything she could to keep Ethan alive long enough to get him here. She risked everything for him," Dr. Bennett affirmed. In that instant, a wrenching remorse flooded Nicholas. He recalled ordering Grace's arrest with cold resolve. and realized he had made a terrible mistake. Grace was no betrayer, no criminal. She was his son's hero. He turned back to the glass, looking at Ethan once more. His heart ached, and for the first time, tears glistened in the eyes of this powerful, unflappable man. Softly, he whispered to himself, voice shaking with regret, "Grace, what have I done?" In that moment, Nicholas understood that nothing in the world compared to his son's life. All his power, wealth, and pride vanished in the face of the woman he had so hastily condemned. He knew now he had to make amends, but would Grace ever forgive him for what he'd put her through? Standing there, watching Ethan fight for his life through the cold glass, Nicholas grasped the true value of humanity. A painful lesson he had just learned from Grace, the woman to whom he now owed everything. Nicholas stood silently before the small holding cell at the end of the hospital corridor. The dim neon light overhead highlighted the tension and torment etched on his face. His heart felt heavy, his emotions so tangled that everything around him seemed distant and blurred. He peered through the little glass window in the door. Inside the cramped space, Grace sat motionless, her wrists still bound by cold steel handcuffs. Her shoulders trembled with each slight shiver, tears streaming down her cheeks, her exhausted, anguished gaze fixed on the cold floor. Seeing her like that was as if 1,000 needles pierced Nicholas's heart. He realized he was the cause of her suffering. Taking a deep breath, he summoned the courage to open the door and step inside. The creak of the hinge made Grace jump and look up, panic and fear wide in her eyes. When she recognized him, her pain only deepened. "Mr. Harrington, I'm so sorry," Grace choked out between sobs. "I never meant to harm you. I only wanted to save Ethan. He was dying. I had no other choice." Nicholas felt a sharp pang with each beat of his heart. He stepped closer, fighting back the flood of emotions surging within him. His gaze toward Grace was no longer cold or angry, but filled with regret and profound sorrow. "Grace," he said softly, his voice trembling, "you don't need to apologize to me. I'm the one who should apologize. I judged you too quickly, without understanding." Grace looked up in surprise, then bowed her head and wept again, her voice catching as she spoke. "I truly had no other option." Ethan almost stopped breathing. "I called for help, but they said it would take too long. I did the only thing I could, even though I knew there would be consequences." Her heartfelt, tear-filled confession cut into Nicholas like a blade. He moved closer and, to his own astonishment, knelt before her, something he'd never done for anyone in his life. "Grace, I understand now," he whispered, voice thick with emotion. "The doctors told me everything you did, you saved Ethan's life. If it weren't for you, my son wouldn't be here today." Grace stared at him, astonished and moved beyond words. Tears welled and spilled down her cheeks as she trembled with gratitude. "I only want Ethan to be okay. He means everything to me. I love him, like my own child." Nicholas's throat tightened with remorse. He gently reached out and placed his hand over Grace's trembling one, his tone sincere. "I know, and that makes me even more ashamed of how I treated you. Grace, I was completely wrong. I judged you thoughtlessly and harshly. There are no words to express how sorry I am." Grace fell silent, looking at Nicholas with tear-filled eyes. Though her pain was still raw, knowing he truly understood brought a measure of relief. Nicholas rose and called to the waiting officer outside. "Officer, remove her cuffs immediately. I'm dropping all charges. This was a terrible misunderstanding." The officer hesitated, then complied, unlocking Grace's handcuffs. She rubbed her wrists. freedom flooding back into her veins even as her emotions swirled. Turning to the officer, Nicholas said firmly, "You may step outside. I need to speak with her privately." Once the door closed behind the officer, Nicholas sat down across from Grace, his gaze unwavering. "I want you to know one thing. I can never thank you enough. I'm deeply grateful you saved Ethan, and I will do everything I can to make up for the harm I caused you." Grace met his eyes, her voice soft but resolute. "I don't need anything, Mr. Harrington. I only want Ethan to get better. That's all that matters." Nicholas nodded, respect and admiration for the dedicated, brave woman before him shining in his eyes. For the first time, he understood that a person's true worth lies not in wealth or status, but in courage and compassion. "Grace, I promise you everything will be all right. You don't need to fear anything anymore. From now on, I stand with you, for Ethan, and for what you've done for my family." Grace nodded, tears now falling not from pain, but from relief and deep gratitude. Though she had endured unimaginable suffering, she knew her actions had truly mattered. In that small, cold room, genuine understanding and gratitude blossomed, dissolving every lingering doubt and misunderstanding, leaving only respect, appreciation, and hope for a brighter future. For them both. Right after that deeply emotional moment between Nicholas and Grace in the little holding cell, word of the dramatic rescue spread like wildfire across the city. Within hours, the heart-stopping story of the black maid who saved the billionaire's son with a yellow Lamborghini was everywhere in the media. Headlines blazed across newspapers and phone screens. The daring maid who stole a $1 million car to save a boy. Defying all consequences, Maid rams Lamborghini into hospital to rescue billionaire's son. Handcuffed after saving a life, Grace Williams, hero or renegade. St. Matthew's Hospital instantly became ground zero for reporters who swarmed the entrance, vying for every detail. Satellite trucks lined the curb, and cameras rolled non-stop. Journalists cornered witnesses for their first-hand accounts. A young nurse who first received Ethan from Grace, voice trembling with emotion, told cameras, "I've never seen anything so moving." She was crying and begging us to save him. Her hands shook as she handed over that dying child. I'm certain, if she had been even a few minutes later, we would have lost him. An older man who watched Grace being cuffed outside the ER was also interviewed. His indignation was obvious. "I stood right there and saw the police arrest her. How could someone who just saved a life be treated like a criminal? It's absurd and unjust." A photograph of Grace, tear-streaked and staring through the ER doors at Ethan, went viral on social media. In that instant, she became the symbol of selfless courage, the impoverished black woman who risked everything to save a child's life. Within hours, Grace Williams went from anonymous maid to the most searched name online. Fierce debates erupted on forums and social platforms, with millions expressing their admiration and support for her. Meanwhile, Nicholas Harrington's initial reaction, of a cold, powerful man, hasty to condemn his devoted employee, was plastered across the same outlets. The public began questioning the compassion and accountability of the ultra-wealthy toward the people who served them. In the hospital waiting room, Nicholas sat in stunned silence as images of himself and Grace filled the news feeds. He knew that his rash misjudgment was now laid bare before the entire city. Guilt weighed on him more heavily than ever. A prominent reporter approached him. "Mr. Harrington, do you have anything to say to the public about this regrettable incident? Do you regret rushing to accuse your maid?" Nicholas merely stared toward the ER doors, where Ethan was still fighting for his life. He understood that this had become more than a private misunderstanding. It was a hard lesson about the dangers of snap judgments and a chance to show genuine respect for the brave act Grace had performed. At the same time, Grace was resting in a private room, head bowed in exhaustion, shielded from prying eyes. A few reporters tried to reach her, but Nicholas had instructed his security detail to protect her privacy. Across the media, experts and social commentators weighed in on wealth inequality, race, and how the rich treat their household staff. A well-known psychologist observed, "Grace Williams' actions prove that love and courage transcend wealth and race. She acted from her heart and sense of duty, despite knowing the severe consequences she might face. This is an invaluable lesson for us all." As the debate continued, the public demanded that Nicholas issue an official statement, explaining Ethan's condition and taking responsibility for how he'd treated the woman who saved his son. Nicholas realized this was no longer just his personal crisis. It had become a social flashpoint, a painful lesson in empathy, and a moment for him to honor Grace's courage. He decided to call a public press conference as soon as possible, to set the record straight, and, above all, to express his profound gratitude to Grace, the woman who risked everything to save his son. Until that moment, public and media attention showed no signs of abating. Everyone was waiting to see whether the powerful Nicholas Harrington would truly atone for his mistake and stand up for Grace Williams, whose selfless bravery the whole world now admired and demanded justice for. As public attention reached a fever pitch and the media pressure grew ever more intense, Nicholas Harrington knew he could no longer stay silent. Under the scrutinizing, judgmental eyes of the public, he resolved to confront his mistake openly and sincerely. That evening, in a large conference room at the City Center Hotel, dozens of camera flashes lit up the packed room of reporters and journalists. Nicholas emerged from backstage, face tense but resolute. With every step, hundreds of watchful eyes followed him in hushed silence. He mounted the podium, took a deep breath, and looked straight into the dozens of lenses trained on him. Knowing that what he was about to say would be more than a speech, it would be the most profound admission of error of his life. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began in a clear, emotion-laden voice, "I stand before you today to address the recent unfortunate events, and above all to express my deepest gratitude to the woman who saved my son's life, Ms. Grace Williams." A ripple of whispers ran through the hall. Nicholas raised his hand for silence and continued, his eyes more earnest than ever. "In the days since this story broke, many false reports and misunderstandings have circulated. Let me be absolutely clear. Grace Williams did not steal my Lamborghini. On the contrary, it was her courageous, decisive, and loving actions that saved my son Ethan's life." He paused, letting his words sink in. The assembly of reporters held their breath, scribbling every word. "I was too quick to judge her," Nicholas went on, his tone heavy with remorse. "That was the greatest mistake I've ever made. Not only did I wrong the person who saved my child, but I subjected her to undeserved disgrace, fear, and suffering. To Ms. Grace Williams and to all of you, I offer my heartfelt apology for my lack of thought." Murmurs of surprise and approval rippled through the crowd. They were unused to seeing such a powerful, typically aloof man bow his head in apology. Nicholas glanced toward the side of the stage where Grace Williams stood, humble and emotional. He signaled to her to join him at the podium. Flashes erupted as she walked forward. Gently placing a hand on her shoulder, Nicholas addressed the room. "Today, in front of all of you, I officially announce my decision. Effective immediately, Grace Williams will serve as my son, Ethan's special caregiver." Gasps and applause broke out across the hall as Grace looked up at him in stunned gratitude. Nicholas wasn't finished. With a clear, confident voice, he added, "I am profoundly grateful for what Grace did for Ethan, and I believe her heroism deserves even broader recognition. Therefore, I am announcing the establishment of the Grace Williams Foundation, which will provide emergency medical support and educational opportunities to children in need, honoring Grace's courageous, selfless spirit." The room erupted in a standing ovation. Reporters feverishly took notes. Tears filled Grace's eyes as she struggled to find words. Nicholas leaned in and spoke quietly, so only she could hear. "Grace, this is the least I can do to repay you for what you've done for my family. Please accept my deepest apology." Tears of relief and gratitude streamed down Grace's face as she nodded. Reporters immediately raised their hands. One female journalist called out, "Ms. Williams, how do you feel about Mr. Harrington's unexpected announcement?" Grace drew a steadying breath, stepped to the microphone, and said in a soft but heartfelt voice, "I'm simply overwhelmed with gratitude. I did what I had to do for Ethan. I love him as if he were my own child. I hope our story shows everyone that compassion and kindness always matter more than anything else." Her words were met with thunderous applause that seemed to go on forever. Nicholas stood proudly beside her, deeply moved. He knew that today's decisions not only righted his wrongs, but also sent a powerful message about humanity, forgiveness, and the true meaning of courage. In that moment, under hundreds of camera lenses, what had begun as a tragic misunderstanding became a shining testament to love, bravery, and redemption, leaving a lasting impression on Grace, on Nicholas, and on everyone watching. The emotional moment on stage having just concluded, Nicholas Harrington stood quietly for a beat, his eyes never leaving Grace Williams, the humble woman at his side. The thunderous applause from the audience gradually died away, leaving a deep hush as everyone waited for the next words from this powerful man. Nicholas stepped forward to the podium once more, his gaze earnest and unwavering as he faced the silent assembly and the lenses of dozens of cameras. His voice, rich and resolute, rang out clearly in the stillness. "Until now, I believed that a person's value was measured by status, wealth, or the great achievements they amassed in their lifetime. But the events of today have shown me something far more important. That compassion and love are the true measures of a human being." Heads in the room nodded as his words sank in. He paused for a moment, allowing that message to resonate before continuing, his tone even more heartfelt. "Grace Williams is neither famous nor wealthy. Yet she, with her courage and her kind heart, was willing to risk everything to save my son's life. That is the most noble act I have ever witnessed." Turning to Grace, his eyes filled with clear respect and gratitude, Nicholas let his next point ring out to the crowd. "In our society, we often overlook the silent laborers among us, those who, day after day, work behind the scenes to make our lives easier. They rarely receive the recognition or respect they deserve. I, too, was once guilty of that oversight." A hush fell over the hall as his admission of guilt and contrition washed over everyone. "From this moment on," he declared, "I want to send a powerful message to our community. Look upon the ordinary workers around you with genuine appreciation. They are the ones who keep our society running, and they deserve our deepest respect and gratitude." Warm, enthusiastic applause filled the room, but Nicholas wasn't finished. He raised a hand for silence and delivered his final announcement with firm clarity. "To make this commitment truly concrete, I am pledging $5 million to establish a nationwide program in first aid and emergency response training for domestic staff. This initiative will be managed by the Grace Williams Foundation, ensuring that housekeepers, nannies, and all ordinary workers have the knowledge and skills to handle critical situations and safeguard precious lives. The room erupted once more in cheers and heartfelt applause. Nicholas allowed himself a small, relieved smile, knowing this was the best way to honor Grace's heroism and restore dignity to all those who serve. A reporter in the front row raised her hand. "Mr. Harrington, what do you hope to achieve with this initiative?" Without hesitation, Nicholas answered, his voice filled with sincere emotion. "I hope this decision sends a powerful message. No job is too small or insignificant when it's done with dedication, love, and compassion. We must be grateful to people like Grace, those who are willing to give everything, even their own safety, to help others." Moved to tears, many in the audience quietly wiped their eyes. Nicholas had touched the hearts of everyone present. Another reporter called out, "Grace, do you feel pressured by these new responsibilities?" Grace stepped forward to the microphone, her eyes bright with determination and warmth. "I will do everything I can to live up to the trust Mr. Harrington has placed in me. I only hope that my story shows everyone that any of us can make a difference, so long as our hearts are full of love and courage." The room broke into sustained applause once again, honoring this unassuming yet extraordinary woman. When the press conference ended, the image of Nicholas Harrington and Grace Williams standing side by side, spreading a message of compassion, respect, and the true value of a human being, was broadcast everywhere. Not just in our city, but across the country, their story became an inspiring symbol of hope and humanity. In his heart, Nicholas knew he had changed completely. No longer would he be the powerful man solely focused on status and possessions. From this day forward, he committed to spend the rest of his life fighting for fairness, compassion, and ensuring that Grace Williams' act of bravery would inspire millions of hearts around the world. After that day, Grace Williams' life was never the same. The story of the brave woman who used a Lamborghini to save a billionaire's son quickly became a symbol of compassion, courage, and hope. But for Grace, the greatest gift she received from that event wasn't fame or media attention. It was the chance to continue caring for Ethan, the child she loved as her own. Nicholas Harrington kept his promise. He arranged for Grace to move into a comfortable apartment near his estate, so she could be close to Ethan every day. The home sat in a peaceful neighborhood, fully equipped, with tasteful yet simple decor. Exactly the kind of space Grace had always dreamed of. The first time she stepped inside her new home, tears of gratitude filled her eyes. She had endured so much hardship but never imagined living somewhere warm, safe, and filled with love. Nicholas also provided her with a car to make getting around easier. It wasn't the fearsome Lamborghini she once drove. It was a modest, elegant vehicle perfectly suited to Grace's needs. To her, that car symbolized the new freedom she'd been given, a sign that her life had entered a hopeful new chapter. Grace's new role was twofold: caring for Ethan and running the Grace Williams Foundation. At first, she felt overwhelmed by this unfamiliar responsibility. She'd always been a quiet housekeeper, never imagining she'd lead an organization or make decisions affecting so many people. But whenever doubt crept in, she remembered Nicholas's trusting eyes, Ethan's small hand clutching hers, and his radiant smile whenever she walked into the room. Those memories gave her the strength to tackle each challenge. With Nicholas's full support, Grace gradually grew into her role. She poured her heart into every meeting with partners, every trip to first aid training centers, and every media appearance. Before long, she became the beloved face of the foundation, inspiring countless other workers with the importance of emergency skills and the power of courage. Yet, through it all, Grace's greatest joy remained Ethan. After that harrowing ordeal, their bond only deepened. Ethan, once on the brink of death, now saw Grace as his true mother. Every morning, he waited excitedly by the window, eager for Grace to arrive so they could share breakfast, and he could tell her about his dreams. "Grace, you aren't going anywhere today, right?" Ethan would ask anxiously, his small hand gripping hers as if afraid she might vanish. Grace would simply smile, pull him into a hug, and whisper, "I'll always be here, Ethan. I'll never leave you." To Grace, Ethan had become more than a job. He was her greatest motivation, the reason she woke up each day determined to better herself. And Nicholas, Ethan's birth father, understood that Grace had become indispensable to his son's happiness. Whenever Nicholas saw the two of them together, his heart filled with indescribable gratitude. He realized that Grace had shown him the true value of life, something money and power could never buy. Despite her new, fulfilling life, Grace stayed humble and never forgot her roots. She often returned to her old neighborhood to visit former neighbors, sharing the first aid skills she'd learned and supporting struggling families through her foundation's resources. One quiet evening, as Grace and Nicholas sat with Ethan at the dinner table, Ethan suddenly said, "Grace, when I grow up, I want to be brave like you and help people." Grace's eyes brimmed with tears as she gently stroked his soft hair. "You will, Ethan. I know you'll become a wonderful man." Nicholas watched them with warmth and deep happiness shining on his face. In that moment, he knew the new life he'd given Grace was more than repayment for her harrowing sacrifice. It was affirmation of what truly matters: love, kindness, and genuine human connection. Grace's new life and her profound bond with Ethan quickly became a beautiful example in the community. A living proof that anyone can make a tremendous difference, so long as they place love and courage above the fleeting values of wealth and status. Although Grace Williams's new life began in happiness and peace, Nicholas Harrington soon realized that his bold, unprecedented decision would inevitably stir up fresh turmoil. Just weeks after that seismic press conference, a wave of skeptical and critical voices rose up against him and Grace. At the high society soirees where Nicholas was once warmly welcomed, he now found himself the target of probing stares and whispered gossip. Many openly expressed their displeasure, calling his move impulsive, ill-considered, or worse, a mere publicity stunt to grab headlines. One evening, at an exclusive business club gathering, Nicholas overheard a cutting remark from Gerald Matthews, one of his longtime partners. "Nicholas has completely lost his mind, promoting a poor maid with zero experience to run a multi-million-dollar foundation? It's a joke." Those words were like a knife to Nicholas's heart. Though he'd steeled himself for criticism, hearing such cruelty in person still stung. He forced himself to remain calm and slipped away quietly, his mind heavy with conflicting thoughts. But the barbs didn't end at private parties. The media, once praising Nicholas's initial heroism, began to turn. Tabloid headlines soon read, "Nuts decision by billionaire Harrington. Why hand millions to an inexperienced maid?" Is Nicholas Harrington sacrificing his reputation and company's future to thank a private heroine? These baseless accusations spread rapidly, fueling heated public debate. Some questioned Grace's ability to manage a $1 million charity, fearing she was out of her depth. Pressure mounted on Nicholas, as even his closest business partners and some major shareholders voiced concerns. At a tense shareholders' meeting, Gerald Matthews stood and delivered a scathing rebuke. "Nicholas, I respect your gratitude toward Grace Williams, but this has gone too far. Entrusting a huge foundation to someone with no managerial background is a reckless gamble that endangers our reputation and finances. The room fell into an uneasy silence as dozens of shareholders turned to Nicholas, waiting for his response. He drew a steadying breath, rose to his feet, and spoke with calm conviction. "Gerald, I understand your concerns, but I want to stress that this decision was neither hasty nor emotional. I chose Grace because she has repeatedly demonstrated courage, responsibility, and integrity, qualities many of us sometimes lack." He paused, making eye contact with each person in the room, then continued even more forcefully, "Our foundation exists to serve the community through empathy and compassion. Those are precisely the traits that make Grace the right leader for it. I have full confidence in her, and I'm prepared to be accountable for any outcome." Nicholas's words earned a stunned silence. The shareholders and partners knew him as decisive, but they hadn't expected him to defend his choice this resolutely. After the meeting, Nicholas returned home, weighed down by the challenges ahead. He worried about Grace, dreading the idea of her enduring any more unjust criticism. That evening, he visited Grace and Ethan at their new apartment. Watching them laugh and play together, his heart softened. Ethan bounded over to hug Nicholas, excitedly sharing all the new things he'd learned from Grace. Seeing his son's bright eyes, Nicholas knew he'd made the right decision. "Grace," Nicholas said gently later, as they sat alone at their small kitchen table, "I want you to know that, no matter what, I stand with you. There will be trials and harsh words from the outside, but I believe we can overcome them." Grace looked at him with deep gratitude and nodded. "I know, Nicholas, and I won't let you down." Nicholas smiled, feeling stronger than ever as he met the determined eyes of the woman before him. In the days that followed, Nicholas took a more active stance against the negative press. He appeared in interviews to defend his decision, stating emphatically, "I did not favor Grace because she saved my son. I chose her because of her compassion, dedication, and bravery, qualities anyone must have to lead a humanitarian organization. I fully trust that in time, this choice will prove itself right." His unwavering stance began to sway public opinion. Skeptics started to reconsider as positive outcomes from Grace's foundation work emerged. Nicholas understood that the road ahead would still hold formidable challenges, but he also knew he'd made the right choice. What mattered most was not external praise or approval, but his firm belief that compassion and love would triumph over society's prejudices and doubts. Time passed, and the storms of public criticism gradually subsided, giving way to the truth that was emerging. The trust Nicholas Harrington placed in Grace Williams was not a blind or impulsive decision, but a profound recognition of the true value of a human being. What Grace accomplished in the following months was the clearest proof of that. With sincerity, dedication, and tireless effort, she transformed the Grace Williams Charity Fund from a once controversial idea into a nationally respected humanitarian organization. Grace refused to step back in the face of skeptical gazes or harsh words. On the contrary, each challenge and every doubt only made her stronger and more resilient than ever. She began with small but solid steps, building structured and effective first aid and emergency response training programs. In no time at all, the charity she led had trained thousands of household staff across multiple states, equipping them with the skills to act swiftly in critical moments, protecting countless lives and ensuring the safety of many. Success stories poured in through the media, serving not only as powerful vindication of Nicholas's choice, but also as the ultimate answer to those who had doubted or criticized Grace. But Grace's greatest achievement wasn't measured in numbers or impressive reports. Her real triumph was seeing Ethan fully recover from the life-threatening illness that had nearly taken him. Each morning, Ethan woke with a radiant smile, his health visibly improving under Grace's devoted and attentive care. At every follow-up appointment, doctors were astonished by the boy's miraculous recovery, something they never thought possible without the exceptional care and genuine love Grace had shown him. One day, at the annual Charity Fund's closing ceremony, attended by the press and major donors, Nicholas Harrington took the stage, pride and emotion shining in his eyes. "I want to share with you the most important lesson I've learned over this past year. We cannot judge a person by their background, skin color, or social status. A person's true worth is defined by their compassion, dedication, and the genuine love they show others. Grace Williams embodies that truth." A thunderous applause erupted from the audience, a powerful affirmation of Nicholas's words. Standing beside Ethan, Grace's eyes glittered with emotion as her heart swelled with gratitude for the unwavering trust Nicholas had placed in her. Nicholas continued, his voice thick with pride and feeling. "Today, I am overjoyed to announce that Ethan is completely healthy, thanks to Grace's devoted care. Her love and dedication not only saved my son, but changed my life, helping me understand the real meaning of humanity." As he finished speaking, Ethan suddenly ran up on stage, his eyes sparkling with happiness. He threw his arms around Grace in a tight hug, drawing emotional gasps from everyone in the hall. Nicholas gently joined the embrace, pulling both of them into his arms. In that moment, the three of them truly looked like a family, bound not by blood, but by love, courage, and mutual respect. After the ceremony, the media once again spread their story across the nation. But this time, there were no doubts or controversies, only deep admiration and heartfelt emotion. The warm images of Nicholas, Ethan, and Grace embracing became a beautiful symbol of compassion triumphing over prejudice. Weeks later, Grace sat in her modest apartment, watching Ethan play happily at her side when Nicholas showed up unexpectedly with a large bouquet of flowers, a warm smile lighting his face. "Grace," he said, stepping inside, "I want to thank you again, not just for Ethan, but for everything you've done for our community. You've shown the world that courage, sincerity, and love can overcome any doubt or prejudice." Grace returned his smile, her eyes soft as she looked at him. "No, Nicholas, I'm the one who should thank you. Without your trust, even when I doubted myself, I wouldn't have had the chance to do any of this." Nicholas nodded gently, glancing at Ethan playing nearby, then spoke with heartfelt sincerity. "Maybe this is the greatest miracle we've ever experienced, that we've all changed and become better because of trust, sharing, and true humanity." Ethan looked up at both of them and beamed. In that instant, the three felt undeniably like a real family, connected by love and genuine trust rather than blood. What began as a tragic misunderstanding had become a story of hope, courage, and love triumphing over prejudice. From now on, Grace, Nicholas, and Ethan would move forward together on a new journey, confident that genuine compassion is the most beautiful, enduring force any of us can embrace. What about you? What do you think of Grace's brave actions and Nicholas's decision? Share your thoughts in the comments below. If you found this story meaningful and inspiring, don't forget to like the video, share it to spread this beautiful message, and of course, subscribe to the channel so you won't miss our next heartwarming stories. Thank you, and see you in the next videos.